Hello and welcome back to the stars, everybody. Welcome back to Starfield, where today we're going to be talking about the Grendel Rifle submachine gun thing, this thing that you find in Starfield. This is probably one of the most common weapons that you're going to be finding throughout Starfield. You find these all over the place. Every type of enemy can have these, as well as they're very common to just find on the ground or in weapon racks. So let's talk about this, go over the pros and cons to it, go over what type of builds that I would recommend for this, its unique versions, and whether or not you should be using the Grendel. So let's go over the pros really quick for the Grendel. The pros to this weapon are actually quite a few. The sights on it are pretty nice. The recoil is very manageable. It has a large magazine by default holding 50 rounds in it, which is pretty good. It also fires the 7.77mm round, which is probably the most common round in the game. It's either that or the 6.5. Both are fairly common, so it's not hard to find. Even if you are running out of this, it's very easy to go to vendors and restock. Vendors usually have a couple hundred of these rounds just laying around. This weapon also doesn't weigh very much, and it has a decent amount of mods. The cons to this weapon are that it doesn't really do that much damage per shot. It has a whopping 3 damage on it base, and even once you go up to the advanced version, which is the highest version that I'm going to be considering for this because we don't know if superior weapons are even implemented correctly into Starfield, that goes up to a 13 damage, so not the most damage per shot, and because of that it also may lack in damage per second too, although its damage per second is much better than its damage per shot. It also lacks in range, so it's not going to be useful in a very long range fight, but inside buildings it can be pretty useful. And one other potential con to this is that it does kind of fall off because it is competing with other weapons that are firing the 7.77mm round, of which there's actually quite a few. For an advanced version of the Grendel for me and my particular build, I was getting about 31 damage out of it per shot. That was with a full auto version of this weapon, and that is actually pretty decent. Certain perks can certainly help with this, ballistics, rifles, armor breaking. There is a lot of different perks that can help with this, and of course legendary effects help a lot with this. So let's go over a build that I would recommend for the Grendel, and I think that this is the best build that I could come up with for this. Now this is going to be using a semi-automatic version of this because semi-automatic versions of weapons tend to do more damage per shot. Well, they basically always do more damage per shot, and they can very easily match the full auto version even in DPS a lot of the time, or even surpass it. So let's run down all of the different options that you have for the P90 and which ones that I would personally recommend. First up, we have the barrel, which there's quite a few different barrels that you could put on this. I decided to take the tech barrel. This one increases the accuracy and decreases recoil. This makes it so the P90 basically has no recoil on it, so I find that to be pretty useful. The long barrel gives you the longest range though, so if you want to go with that one is also a pretty decent option, and the stabilizing barrel seemed to be pretty good when I was using it too. For a grip and stock, you might as well just go with the tactical grip. There's no real reason not to. It's just a straight upgrade to your weapon where it just makes it so everything is better with this. That's just a huge bonus. For internals, you have high velocity or high powered. I decided to go with high powered with mine, but high velocity would be a decent option too if you want to get a little bit longer range with the P90. That one's okay too. I personally prefer the higher damage per shot. For a laser, I would highly recommend the Recon laser sight. It's just an upgrade over the regular laser, and it just helps with accuracy overall, both hipfire and ADSing. For the magazine for this, I would recommend one of two options. Either go with armor piercing rounds or white hot rounds. I'm going with white hot rounds. I find them to be a bit better. Armor piercing rounds can be useful, especially against humanoid enemies, because they tend to have a decent amount of armor on them, so you can break through it. The white hot rounds add fire damage every time you want to hit an enemy, which can rack up damage per second pretty well. You can also light the target on fire, so they're going to be taking continual damage over time. And since the P90 has a large magazine and even in semi-auto can fire pretty fast, this is pretty easy to trigger and to rack up that fire damage since it can keep stacking. For a muzzle, I would recommend the suppressor. The main reason I'd recommend this is if you're going with the stealth perk, then the suppressor will just get you a straight damage buff. It does nerf your overall range, but you probably aren't going to be shooting at super long range with the Grendel anyway. If you didn't have stealth and you didn't really care about this, then either the compensator or the muzzle brake could also work on this. For optics, I would recommend the short scope. If you have the option to put a scope on a weapon, you can just get a damage buff thanks to the sniper perk, and this one has a pretty decent scope. It's not going to be super effective at very long range, but once again, the Grendel probably isn't going to be firing at very long range. And then for a receiver, I would recommend the semi-automatic receiver. This will get you the most amount of damage. With this build, my particular Grendel, and with all of my perks, got to 130 damage per shot, plus an additional 10 damage on the fire damage on top of that. So going to 140 damage, at least if we add both those, it could be higher or lower depending on what resistances the enemy has. That is over 100 damage increase from just a standard Grendel. I wouldn't really recommend a full auto version of this. for a couple of reasons, and it's mostly just to do with other weapons that also use this particular cartridge. The Beowulf can also be full auto, and it's a bit better than this. The Kodama can also be full auto, and it has bleed on it already, so that's already a huge plus for that one. And there's also the microgun, which is full auto by default, and will have more DPS than something like the Grendel. So I think a semi-auto version that you're using at close to medium range is probably your best bet if you want to get the most out of this weapon. For the standard Grendel, in my tier list recently, I put it in C tier, and I think it still kind of belongs in C tier. It's an overall pretty decent weapon that's okay at everything, doesn't really excel at anything, and can work pretty well at close to medium range. It's also one of the first weapons that you can get to use the 7.77mm, so that helps it out quite a bit, and I would still keep it in the C tier. For the modified version of this, it does get better, however it's still competing against some very hard competition, so I don't think I could put this any higher than low B tier on the tier list. And now with the base P90 out of the way, let's talk about two of the unique versions that you can get with this. You can buy either of these. One of them is done through a quest, one of them you can just buy outright. So first up we have the Acid Rain. This is the P90 that looks quite a bit different. I do like the green highlights on this one. You get this one from a shop after completing a quest. You do this in the well. This one does have some unique modifications for it where it does corrosive damage. Kind of makes sense being called Acid Rain, so you can trigger corrosive damage on this and deal a little bit more damage over time to enemies. It also has the short barrel, which I don't really like. It shortens the range overall of the weapon, but you can ADS with it faster. The laser sight on it, which is fine. The compensator, which is also fine for this type of spraying up close weapon. Tactical grip, which is a bonus on this. And then high velocity, which is really weird if you're going to have the short barrel on it. You might as well put a long barrel on it, that way you get the most out of that. This weapon I found to be completely fine when I was using it. It's potentially an upgrade to just a regular Grendel, but it's not super difficult to find Grendels laying around, so you're more than likely going to get rare versions of this, and you're probably going to get something a little bit better than just a corrosive version of this weapon. You might be able to get a lacerating version or a furious version or something like that that's going to do a little bit more than this one. Our second unique Grendel is the Buzzcut. You can buy this one in Neon from the gun shop. And this one is a little bit more interesting than our last one because this one actually has a pretty decent modification on it. This one has Rapid on it, which increases the rate of fire of the weapon by 25%. That can be pretty good. That one's actually generally a pretty decent mod to put on most weapons, and if you want to keep this as a full auto weapon, you can. Now, for the other mods that this one has, it has a short barrel, a laser sight, a reflex sight, compensator, armor-piercing rounds, and high velocity on it. All of that is actually pretty good. The short barrel, again, I don't really like with this one, but it kind of makes sense since this is supposed to be a spray weapon up close, so that's okay. Laser sight is perfectly fine. Reflex sight is also okay with this one, but I would prefer either iron sights because I don't really like the reflexes in this game, or short scope so that we get more damage out of this. Compensator is fine for a spraying weapon. Armor-piercing rounds really nice for punching through armor and doing a little bit more damage. And high velocity, once again, is kind of weird with the short barrel. I don't know why they don't just have one of these with a long barrel. Either way, these are decent options. So would I recommend the Grendel as a weapon? Sure, if you can. It's pretty good early on. However, I do think the Grendel falls off pretty hard as the game goes on. You can get better versions of this, and if you do really like the Grendel itself, then by all means use it. I think it is a really cool weapon, but I would much rather be using like the Beowulf or the Kodama over this one. It can go through ammo a little bit quick, whereas the Beowulf generally won't. The Kodama can, but the Beowulf is pretty good for ammo efficiency, and that's kind of the main weapon that I compare this to. It also doesn't help that both of these are considered rifles in this game, so every skill that would go for rifles goes to both of them, and I think that that weapon is just a little bit better. But nevertheless, it's not a bad weapon by any means, and it can totally work in the right situations. So thank you guys so very much for watching this. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Tell me your thoughts on the Grendel down below, and I will talk to you guys next time. Bye-bye, everybody.